Hey guys, today I want to talk about how I made my latest custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder level, which is called Lodestone Lair. As is becoming the norm for my levels at this point, this one once again revolves around a pretty unique and custom mechanic, in this case magnets, which I will go into more detail on in a separate upcoming video. Just like the Mirage platforms, in terms of functionality, this gimmick is entirely made up of pre-existing game mechanics that are recontextualized with some custom visuals. I designed the magnets to interact with 3 other gimmicks: metal pipes, spike balls, and the metal player wonder effect, so those are all used in the level. I think it would have made the most sense to use the factory theme with this set of mechanics, which was the plan originally, but since I couldn't make the magnets interact with metal gamboos, and I didn't just want to put generic Koopa Troopers or Goombas or anything in a factory level, I decided to use the cave theme instead. And because I knew the level would largely consist of vertical sections, I settled on using swirly pods, which can climb on walls, as the level's main enemy type. So now let's have a look at the level creation process. It's weird to think that after more than 2 years of custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder level creation, this is my first one that uses the generic cave theme. That's largely down to the fact that up until a few months ago, I hadn't made a level using every overarching world theme yet, so now that that's been done, I'm having to use more specific themes to keep my levels feeling fresh. Of course, I'm pretty sure I haven't made this clear in a while, so I might as well repeat it. The theming of all of my levels is definitely the #1 aspect of them that I might change at a later date. I still have absolutely zero plans for what the structure of the eventual mod that all of these levels are going to be released in is going to look like, so for all I know, I may end up changing the theme of most of them to fit with what I end up settling on. This is also part of the reason why I decided that, unlike a lot of cave levels, this one doesn't begin and end with sections where the player enters and leaves the cave from some other theme. I considered using the rainy overworld theme for these parts of the level and maybe also one of the bonus rooms, but decided I'd rather make sure the level could fit into just about any overarching world theme without many adjustments. Anyways, speaking of the level's overall structure, the fact that it starts with this short horizontal section before transitioning to a vertical area that makes up most of the level is the result of how I decided to introduce the magnet mechanic. I realized that if I introduced every variation and rotation of magnets quite quickly, the player might have a hard time grasping the inherent logic of how every magnet section works. As opposed to, for example, the Mirage mechanic, which is all about surprising the player, the idea with the magnets is that they always function in a way that the player can easily anticipate. So therefore, the first area repeatedly uses red magnets that pull objects upwards, and it is only in the later vertical section that the blue on-off magnets are introduced and also rotated for more complicated setups. The other thing that separates the first part of the level from the rest is its use of timer blocks as opposed to on-off blocks. Switching from one to the other a third of the way through the level was something I'd planned on doing from the start, but actually whilst working with the timer blocks, I considered cutting the mechanic from the level entirely. In the original game, timer blocks are exclusively used for level elements that only ever benefit the player, meaning you'll never want the timer to run out. But because of the more complicated setups I was hoping to introduce even early in the level, having the magnets be permanently activated just wouldn't have worked. So there are 2 points in the small first area that specifically rely on the player purposefully letting the timer run out, which is kinda interesting I suppose, but also hard not to make very boring. On the other hand, part of the reason I didn't want to use on-off blocks throughout the whole level was because I've already made 2 levels that do that, and I don't want them to become my mod's accidental main mechanic. This same thought process led to the decision to make the Wonder effect once again use the timer blocks as opposed to on-off blocks, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So the metallic pipes that are moved by the magnets just get pushed around by some vanilla movement tags that were super simple to set up, but the same obviously isn't the case for the spike balls, which can also be affected by the magnets. Like I said, I'll go into more detail in an upcoming video, but the spike ball movement is achieved using a pretty janky and very limited technique that relies on a trick the original game uses to simulate rotated gravity. The main problem with this implementation is that the rotated gravity of the spike balls is universal, so I can't have two spike balls on screen at the same time without both of them falling in the same direction, even if only one of them is touching a magnet beam. This, as you may have noticed, forced me to only ever have one spike ball on screen at the same time, at least in sections where the spike balls are affected by a magnet. And since the majority of the level takes place in a vertical area, I also couldn't easily dump spike balls into pits to get rid of them repeatedly and make more dynamic sections. So I really kinda designed myself into a corner here, which is why this part of the level is very reliant on pipe setups as opposed to ones that use spike balls. When I was coming up with the level and its use of magnets, I was originally considering splitting it up into even more sub-areas where each one would have a different magnet activation method, and one of those areas would have the magnets turn on and off repeatedly and automatically. But when I ended up deciding to mainly focus on manually activating the magnets, I came up with the idea of relegating the automatic activation idea to a bonus room. And because, like I just explained, it was a struggle to keep the spike ball mechanic consistently present throughout the level, I was happy when I came up with the idea of making a spike ball rolling back and forth the thing that triggers this repetitive magnet activation. The same can also be said for swirly pods, by the way. It was difficult for me to come up with ways of integrating them into the level's variety of platforming based setups. But I don't think every level mechanic needs to be a super major or memorable part of every level it's in. The original game used swirly pods in loads of levels without them always being super integral, so I don't see why I can't do the same. One of the tricky things about making a level that revolves around on-off blocks is the fact that most setups have to be designed to work no matter whether the blocks are turned on or off when the player encounters them. The solution to this is technically rather simple, just make sure there are on-off blocks all over the place so the player can always hit one to move the upcoming setup into position. But I really don't like the idea of spamming my level with more on-off blocks than is strictly necessary, so I tried as best as I could to make most of them basically vital for the level progression, and in several cases the player is actually expected to hit the same on-off block twice in different positions, which I think makes for some pretty satisfying design. In order to make the magnetized spike ball setup something the player has to interact with, there are several parts of the level where the player has to use spike balls to break some brick blocks to progress. The dangerous thing about setups like these is that you can never be entirely sure that the player won't be able to find a way to break the spike ball and thus get stuck. Thankfully, Wonder has a pretty cool feature that allowed me to avoid this possibility because its pipe generators can be set to only ever spawn one object at a time until that object is destroyed, at which point a new object is spawned. So for every spike ball puzzle in the level, I made sure the spike ball respawns if the player somehow manages to destroy it. And players being able to destroy them isn't that far-fetched of an idea, since the elephant transformation can move spike balls around. One of the biggest challenges of designing vertical Mario levels is the fact that vertical progression is kinda hard to implement without things getting repetitive. Obviously, a section like this could be almost entirely made up of stacks of semi-solids, which the player can jump up time and time again. And that actually is how some of Nintendo's own tower levels in the new Super Mario Bros. Games are designed, but this is something I've generally tried to avoid. So vertical levels are left with two other options: either use mechanics that somehow move the player vertically or force the player to do wall jumps. Although magnets can be used to move pipes and thus the player up and down, I found that weirdly vertical magnet beams were pretty hard to implement into this particular section. So instead I relied on wall jump setups time and time again. Although some Nintendo levels in some Mario games require the player to perform wall jumps to progress, this is definitely more of a mod thing, and it's something I don't always love doing. But in the case of this level, with all its moving pipes, not to mention the wall-crawling swirly pods, it felt like the right thing to do. I've talked about my struggles to make Wander's camera work completely smoothly in previous timelapse videos, but actually I have to say it hasn't been so bad recently. I've found several tricks, like using some extreme scroll settings in very small quantities to push the camera around, or moving a scroll limit tag to forcibly push the camera to make things way less limited. So this allowed me to make the last third of the level switch back to horizontal progression, which I needed because of the Wander effect. But before we get into that, I made one more bonus room that requires the player to kill a bunch of swirly pods by pushing a spike ball around the chamber using magnets. It's not the most creative setup ever considering what kind of mechanics the level uses, and I do feel like I maybe fall back on the enemy KO bonus room concept a bit too much, but I like the way this thing turned out, especially considering how complicated all the different magnet gravity triggers were to set up behind the scenes. You get into that bonus room by riding a pipe up and off screen, which you then also see as you enter the other area. It took quite a lot of finagling with different types of movement tags before I got the smooth motion of the pipe moving up and then falling back down when entering the bonus room, but it ended up looking exactly like how I'd imagined. At this point in the level, I wasn't really sure how far I should take things before moving on to the Wander effect. I keep talking about this, but level length and structure is something I often struggle with. I end up spending so much time coming up with ideas for my levels that it's hard for me to implement most of them without things feeling bloated. So after implementing a pretty tricky setup where the player has to climb a pipe structure as it slowly falls off screen, I decided to cut my plans short a bit to introduce the Wander effect earlier than I had planned. The funny thing is that in doing this, I thought I was maybe finally in the process of making another relatively short level, but that really didn't end up being the case, so I guess I should be glad I didn't make the level any longer. Anyways, as I previously mentioned, this level's Wander effect is the metal player transformation. This is actually the aspect of the level that made me delay its creation for a really long time, because obviously using the metal player in a level all about moving metallic stuff with magnets is the right decision, but it took me ages to decide how the magnets could actually affect the metal player. Wander doesn't feature anything that would allow me to actually properly flip the player physics like I did for the spike balls, and pushing the player around using some invisible wind actors would have been extremely janky. So I ended up deciding to use the zero gravity Wander effect on top of the metal player one, and only activate it when the player gets pulled upwards. I think this makes a certain amount of sense if the force of the magnets is exactly the same as the weight of the metal player. A weightless effect is what would happen in real life, I believe, but obviously if it had been possible, I would have preferred forcibly moving the player around with the magnets, just like the other metallic mechanics. Anyways, this section's overarching magnet effect is once again triggered by hitting timer blocks as opposed to on-off blocks, because this adds a sense of urgency to the section. The problem with combining the metal player transformation and 0G is that this means the player is basically unkillable and can move anywhere they like, so I somehow needed to introduce a threat into the Wander effect to compensate for this, and the threat of falling into a pit because the timer that allows the player to fly is about to run out fit the bill. The reason this section features the overarching magnet effect as opposed to the individual magnet objects is because, just like with the spike balls, the effect that changes the player's gravity is universal. This would have been fine if I was only designing this level to work in single player. I could have just turned the 0G on and off depending on whether the player is or isn't touching a magnet beam, but since I've still been trying to make an effort to make my level sort of multiplayer friendly, and I couldn't possibly account for situations where some players are and others aren't being magnetized, I decided to cover the entire Wander effect in one massive magnet beam. This also had the side effect of allowing me to use multiple spike balls on screen for the same reason. The section honestly still isn't super thrilling considering how conceptually crazy it is, but I'm happy with how I managed to integrate all of the level's main mechanics without the whole thing dragging on for too long. The flagball puzzle is pretty much what you'd expect given the level's main mechanic. The player can push a set of pipes down to form a staircase, but accessing the on-off block to do so without getting locked in is rather tricky. I guess if I had to critique this setup in relation to the rest of the level, the problem with it is that it only uses the magnets and pipes, as opposed to also including spike balls and or swirly pods. But although I've occasionally done this in the past, I don't think cramming all of a level's numerous mechanics into one final setup before the flagball is always strictly necessary, or even preferable to a simpler setup. I quite like the elegance of this simple puzzle that also incorporates a classic Mario flagball staircase, so I'm happy with it. Back when I made custom New Super Mario Bros. U levels, I somehow slowly fell into a habit of putting large and very complicated background walls into basically all of my levels. Even random overworld stages would be covered in background tiles that wouldn't have been there if Nintendo had made these levels. So when Wonder came out and featured a very different tiling system, I decided to change up my style and try to use background walls more sparingly. And more recently, I've actually also stopped adding background tiles to most of my levels entirely until the very end of the creation process. Now I add them when I place in the final few decorations. And I think this is the right approach, because it's allowed me to not just add them in places where I feel like the screen feels empty otherwise, but also in places where it actually looks nice for them to be there. So yeah, kind of a random anecdote to end the time-lapse off with, but it's something I've weirdly put a lot of thought into recently. Anyways, now let's go check out the level in-game. Okay, and here we are. So like I tend to do a lot, I not only introduce the main mechanic at the start here, but also we immediately have a bit of a coin secret, and those coins there were in the shape of a magnet, which is of course the level's main mechanic. I don't really think these timer blocks, like I talked about during the time-lapse, I don't really think those ended up working amazingly well in this first section, or at least not the way I had planned them to work, because there's just a bit of waiting around involved, like right here. The reason that you can't enter this section until the timer has run out, or the reason I designed it that way, is because I wanted to preserve the surprise of this here, where you activate the... Oh, that was interesting. Oh, now it's going the other direction. Okay, this is all very interesting. Yeah, but you preserve the surprise of the way the spike ball gets pulled by the magnet. This has never happened before, I'm not even joking. But there we go. The fun thing about the spike balls is that they are, at least the nice thing about them, and the way they are made in this game, is that they always like get their momentum back. So that way, stuff like that can never truly break the setup. Also, I actually need this shell. I'm fumbling my way through this. Can you tell? Okay, let's do that. And that's going to hit that Wonder Bud, and here we go. Now we can keep going. Yeah, what was I talking about? Yeah, the timer locks don't really work amazingly well in most of this section, I feel like, so there's no wonder that I got rid of them so quickly. I do like what I did here, where those spike balls hit the timer block, but then I moved this pipe down with that Wonder Bud, and that way the timer no longer gets hit, and that means that once it runs out, which it just did, we can now get the first purple 10 coin, which once again involves a bit of waiting, but actually like getting around those spike balls in that time can be a bit tricky, like I just demonstrated, so therefore the waiting there isn't really that bad, I think, because it's kind of a part of the intentional design. Yeah, here we can do this sort of wall jump thing to get these secret coins, but normally you're just supposed to jump up like this. And I like what I did here. Like, obviously you can just get up here with a wall jump, but like the intentional way is to jump onto those pipes. And then here we have a more intentional wall jump section with this section where there's also a swirly pod, which, I mean, the weird thing about swirly pods, or not even the weird thing, but just like the annoying thing from a design perspective, is that it's really hard to limit where they go. So like this guy's just going to kind of keep moving like this, which isn't really like how I intended this section to work, because now he's kind of trapped in here. But I guess it's fine. Also, the way the camera moved over there to reveal that the secret pipe uses the same sort of tech that's also used for these moving pipes, actually, the same tag, And that all works really smoothly, and the secret camera setup there, I think it kind of works perfectly, honestly. And yeah, here's the section where the magnets get turned on and off repeatedly using the spike ball, which is just kind of fun and simple. And I did consider, like I talked about during the time lapse as well, I believe, I did consider making a bigger section with that and not making it a bonus room, but I think it ended up working pretty nicely as just a little section like that. And of course we have another moving midway flag setup, like I love doing, and that all works pretty smoothly, I think. And yeah, this section here is also pretty interesting, where the spike ball gets pulled up by the magnets, but we can also make it go back down, and we can make it go up the other side. There's no real like difference or advantage to doing either side, but it's just a bit of fun, you know. And you can actually get this coin secret over here. Okay. You can get this by jumping up like this, which isn't really the way I intended it to be gotten. You can also get it more like, let me see, you can do it like this, and then like do this little tricky, there we go, and you can also go over here, and that's more what I had in mind, but either way it's fine, and either way it's like slightly tricky as I demonstrated, but obviously the main route is doing this, and I just really like this satisfying setup here. It all just lines up so perfectly. I think it's one of the more interesting setups in the level for sure. And actually, speaking of which, I also really like this setup here with the horizontally moving spike ball. It's very unique and I think very interesting. And also what I like about it is that the spike ball is both like a way for you to progress and also a threat. And that's usually how I like to design my levels the most, is by having, you know, the same object serve multiple purposes, or like multiple interesting different mechanics within a single section, basically. And yeah, speaking of which, I suppose here there's also a bit of a like puzzle involved with this section, where you have to drop this platform down, and then this platform spawns. But then if you want to ride the platform, you need to hit the on-off block again. And yeah, there we go. And this leads to the second bonus room for the third purple 10 coin. And the funny thing about this bonus room is that I'm pretty sure if you just wait around and don't even hit the on-off blocks, I'm pretty sure it will just kind of keep, like, if I just had it like this the whole time, I'm pretty sure eventually all the swirly pods would die. But obviously that would be a bit boring, so the way to actually do this section is something like that. There we go. The way you hit those swirly pods can be a bit random sometimes, like the way they move and the way the spike ball bounces off the walls and stuff. But for the most part, it's something that I feel like I've gotten pretty good at over the course of like playtesting the level. Anyways, I can go down here and hit this Wonder Bud, and that will then eventually lead to the Wonder effect. This little final jump here is what would be the final part of the level if you went into this green pipe, which leads to the same flagpole area we're going to see after the Wonder effect. But that spawns on an off block, and that allows us to get this secret little Wonder Flower compartment. And actually, the way that entire structure there disappears like that is a bit strange looking, maybe, but that's just because of like how I needed the section to be designed. I couldn't have this whole like wall in the way, and I also didn't want to deal with any more on-off block stuff, because obviously in this section we have the return of the timer blocks, which is also why I had to make sure that I had the timer blocks in the earlier part of the level, because I didn't want that to all come out of nowhere. And yeah, in case it wasn't obvious, and I think I also talked about it during the time lapse, but the logic here is the idea that the whole section here gets magnetized upwards, and so because the metal player is very heavy, I suppose, that means that instead of getting pushed upwards, you just sort of end up with like zero gravity, which I don't know if there's any real science behind that sort of idea, but I think it kind of works. I would have preferred if I could have just made the player like get pushed upwards as well, but either way, I guess it's okay. And yeah, in this section here, we have to hit a few more of these timer blocks to progress. And you can get kind of sidetracked and try to get all of those coins, and that might end up making the timer run out. I'm not really sure. But for the most part, this is really a very easy section, which I don't think is too annoying, because I just think, like, for the most part, this level also hasn't been that difficult overall. So I don't think it's too bad of a thing that the Wonder effect there was pretty trivial. And yeah, now we can move on to the flagpole area. This was really designed with the idea that maybe the the magnet would be blue when you enter this room, but whether you enter this area from the wonder effect or from the normal like level progression, it's gonna be turned on either way. So that was kind of a design oversight, but it doesn't really matter either way. Yeah, the idea is that the idea here is that you can make that staircase fall down like, oh, can I get this? There we go. And then you can go over the top here, and you can just barely see the edge of the tiles here stick out below the screen, so that isn't completely random, that. And yeah, then we can get to the top of the flagpole. So I think that's gonna do it for this video, guys. If you like the video, maybe consider leaving a like or subscribing or whatever. I also have a Discord server and YouTube channel memberships you can sign up for to get early access to my videos. But thank you guys so much for watching, and bye bye!